Hey everyone, I'm Nick and welcome back to the channel. Now if you've been watching for a while, you may recognize this as the $700 Volvo XC90 that I rebuilt and snatched from the jaws of the scrapyard. It's a 2006 2.5 liter 5-cylinder and it's been running great. But there are a few finishing touches to wrap this up. And all of them are engine mounts. So these engine mounts are worn to the point where the engine is starting to clunk when starting to move from a standstill, and that's really not ideal. And this is probably the last video you'll see on this truck because once it's done, it's for sale. Now this engine, believe it or not, is supported in 7 different places. I guess Volvo really likes to be complete. And we're gonna be complete too, and we're gonna place all of them. So let's get to it. To remove the torque bar, we'll start by removing the bolt to the top engine mount. The nut and bolt are both 18mm. And that's a 15 on the top and an 18mm on the bottom. Here and here. Got a wrench and impact. Nut out, bolt out, take that out. The top engine mount is held on by 4 13mm bolts. If you need to remove the charge pipe, loosen the hose clamps and remove the 2 torque screws at the front of the engine. The bolts are longer on the left side of the mount and shorter on the right side. And as you can see, this is worn out. With the new mount in place, we'll get the bolts started by hand. Then, all 4 bolts get torqued to 50 Nm. Our next step is the mount that connects to the transmission, which is behind the under tray. This part is called the lower torque rod, and the part I'm using is a Corteco 800000935. It's held on by 2 18mm nuts on the crossbeam and 2 13mm bolts on the transmission. You want to keep these because we're using them on the new part. Ooh. Wow. It was not supposed to be that floppy. Look, this is stiff. And so one of the reasons I knew that this was a replacement I had to do is because under acceleration, you can feel the engine just go clunk. That is just not ideal. Now for these, I can't fit my impact. So we are loosening, so I'm pushing away from me. Okay, perfect. Oh, this mount is ruined. That's so bad. Wow. New one, nice and stiff. Old floppy piece. Just the bushing is completely gone. Okay, so let's try to line this up. So this with the 2 studs will drop in here. Yeah, and this other one will just slide up into place. And you really don't need anything special to do this. Just thread these on lightly. And of course you want to make sure you leave some slack because you will have to move it into place so that these bolts will line up. If you need to, you can push on the center part here, flex it just enough to get the things in place. Now, if you're also planning on replacing the front and rear engine mounts, or pads as they're also called, The bolts to the transmission need to be left off. The two bolts that mount to the transmission are 35 Newton meters. So I could do the first one at least. Okay, now, with that done, these are 65 Newton meters. Okay, now the next step for both is an angle tighten, and for the transmission side is 40 degrees. So. And then for the subframe mounts, we're doing 60 degrees. Nope. Well, I got to 31 and 118 Newton meters. Angle tighten bolts or nuts usually are replace. So about 30 degrees, 110. I don't think that's going anywhere. Cool. That was nice and sturdy now. Since we're working on the front and rear engine mounts next, I removed the transmission bolts from the lower torque rod to allow the engine to be raised up as needed. Now, since we're going to be starting on the front engine mount, which is down this way, to get a little better access, we're going to remove this part of the intake, which goes into the air box. So this is two 8mm bolts. This comes up and just unclips from the intake, the square tube section. As you can see down here, there's the nut that holds that on the front side. So we're going to need to use an extension to loosen that up. I'm actually going to spray it with BB Blaster now, help that get going. And then on the underside here, you can see the mount right there. And the bolt right there is a 13 on this truck. So we're going to break that free too, and that'll help us get started. Alright, so as you saw, we used a couple wobble sockets to kind of just get that in. And we got it free, so that's good. Right there, that's free. That's good. Now we're going to do the bottom side. And from the bottom side, we have our bolt. So we'll keep this on hand because we're using this for the new engine mount. Now our next step is going to be to jack up the engine from oil pan with a block of wood. And that'll give us it'll angle it up, let us free the front engine mount, and we'll drop the new one in, and then we'll get the nut started by hand, and we'll get the bolt started by hand through that hole, and then we can lower the engine back onto it. To raise the engine, do not use the jack directly on the oil pan. I'm using a block of wood, and I made sure the oil filter housing is not touching the block. You don't want to damage the oil pan or the filter. With the engine raised up, we can reach in and pull out the engine mount. Prestige. See, it's definitely a lot shorter. That's collapsed. Yeah. That's badly collapsed. A 1/4 inch at least. It was definitely time for a replacement. The engine mount has a little spike, and that is in line with the car or the truck. So you'll be able to push it all the way up so you can get the threads, only if this is in place. Because the new mount is taller, I had to raise the engine a little more to get it in place. Once it fit, I was able to get the nut started so it wouldn't fall out of place while we work on the lower bolt. And then we're going to go underneath, get the bolt just started so it'll land in the right spot. And we can lower the engine gently. With a little help, I lowered the engine enough to get the lower bolt started. Once that's in place, we can lower the engine all the way down. We'll tighten it up to spec after we do the rear mount. The rear mount, there is a nut down there. Pull this out. Can you see it right there at the bottom? So I have a wobble extension and a regular extension. Much easier. I had a magnet on hand to avoid losing the nut. Top one. 15, same as the other. So now that we're working on the rear engine mount at the bottom, we're actually going to be working between this subframe part and the sway bar, which comes over here and across. Now this gap is quite small, and we are trying to get a 13 millimeter through. But fortunately, if you use a pry bar, you can push a little bit here, and that'll open up the gap just enough to fit the socket through, and then you can release the pressure and maneuver the socket onto the bolt. Pry on that, push it through, let it go. It's very light pressure. You only need very light pressure. And then getting the socket on, once you've maneuvered it in place, it works. And I've already broken this free, but with I used a breaker bar because I guess it worked better than the impact. So it seems like the sway bar is getting a little bit in the way of the extensions. So. And that is the rear bolt. It was easier to get it started than to get it all the way out, but it is out now, and that is good. For the rear mount, we lifted the engine from the transmission side and used a block of wood again. Yeah, one more. Yep. I gotta figure out how to get this out of here. Transfer case is in the way. There we go. Okay, so as you can see, this one has a heat shield, and it lines up with the slot on the little pin. We pull that off and reuse it. Let's get our good. Well, this one's not squished as much, like an 1/8 of an inch, maybe. Maybe about the same actually.
It's glass.
Yeah,
For sure.
for sure. Slot back on. Now I gotta fit this back in. Maneuver it back here. See the pin. See the openings there. I'm gonna work on that. I think I could probably reach in and get the nut started before you lower it down.
Ever so slightly lower.
Yeah, let's go down a bit. There's actually quite a ways to go. I guess stop. Actually, I can give it a pump up. Just a little more. Okay, perfect. Okay, got it with my fingertips. Screw it in. Don't touch anything yet. Okay, you can lower it down. Ready, stop 1 second. We'll double check. Go. And that's in. Okay, I'm gonna tighten the bottom one back up. So for the bolts to hold the engine mounts in, both front and rear, it's 50 Newton meters of torque. So get that in. There we go. I did the rear one already, since I needed both hands. So the front and rear engine mounts torque down from the bottom. I'm going to put this the lower torque arm back in place. That's still 13, and we're going to first step is to torque to 35 Newton meters. And then what we want to do, go to 40 degrees. There we go. As all the bottom mounts secured, we're going to secure them from the top now. So the bottom nuts torqued down, we're going to do the top on the front and rear mounts. And those are also 50 Newton meters. That's the rear done. There we go. That is the front and rear engine mounts in. With the new mounts in place, the engine feels a lot sturdier. A 1/4 inch on the front and rear gave it a lot of room to move. Let's put this intake back on before we keep going. Yep. If you're having trouble aligning the intake pipe, don't forget to use the bolt holes as a reference. Now we're going to do a passenger side engine mount, or engine pad as Volvo calls it. And I'll be using a Hutchinson 538605, which I got from CP Euro. And as you can see, it's a hard rubber pad, plate, 2 bolts. So those 2 bolts on the plate, 2 bolts to the engine. To access it, we're going to be removing this wheel. That's why I'm here. Get your hearing protection on. Now my car is 1 10mm here, but there may be 2 on yours. Let that out, we're sliding this off. Sliding this off, pivoting it down. Folding this one back, clamping it in. Right here you can see pad, which is 1 bolt there, 1 bolt there, and then the 2 up here. These are 13s, and the 2 of the subframe are 17s. 13s on the top and 17s on the bottom part. Also, just to note, this is keyed. There's 2 pins, 1 here and 1 here, so you'll only be able to fit it in one way. Now, to make it easier to remove this, the way to do it is to jack the engine up just a tiny bit, which should relieve stress or pressure on the mount, which will allow you to remove it. Now you want to do this carefully because you don't want to damage the oil pan, so use like a block of wood or something similar. I have the floor jack and a block of wood supporting the engine, only using slight pressure, and I'll adjust the height as needed while we replace the mount. For the top 2, I'm using an extension. You can see, maybe you saw, the engine is free from this. It jiggled a little bit. Just to break them loose on the subframe side. I'm gonna try the breaker bar. Put your weight into it a bit. A ratcheting wrench. Yeah, okay, I gotta jack that up a tiny bit because the little pins are not clearing right now. Okay. Yep, there you go, lift it out. Just a piece of rubber there, huh? Alright, so yeah, the 2 holes for these pins are towards the front. Yeah, here. Before I put the other one in, you can see there's definitely some sideways movement there. We will be better off doing it without. So, grab my 13s, see if I'm lined up here. It's a little high. I'm not doing it yet. I want to make sure things in the pin, so I'm going to lower it down a tiny bit. That's going in. Okay. Now it's torquing time. We are starting with the small ones at the top, and those are 35 Newton meters. Okay, that's 2. So the big bolts are actually only up to 20 Newton meters. Okay. At that done, we're doing an angle tighten again. We are doing 60 degrees on both. Okay. Now we just have to put things back together. So we're going to remove our clamp here. We're going to swivel this up. Here, 10mm nut. And with that done, we can put the wheel back on. I'll torque the lug bolts to 140 Newton meters once the car is back on the ground. The last parts we're replacing are the torque bar end mounts. And as you can see, all this flex here, these bushers are bad, so we're going to be replacing these engine mounts as well. Now these, they're actually 2 different units. So the parts I have are MTC VR929 and 930. VR930 is going to be on the intake side, and VR929 is on the coolant bottle side. Alright, so let's get started on this side. These are 14mm bolts. You can see I can move this pretty easily. It's pretty loose, kind of loose. I think the front and rear pads are probably bigger contributors to the lurching or clunking getting started from a standstill. So this one's just a circular opening, so we're just going to line it up and get it started. So on the other side it's actually slots, so we'll leave those loose so that we can make sure everything's aligned properly when we put the torque rod back in. So these are 50 Newton meters. Okay, that's in. Same thing on the other side, it's 14 again. This side with the slot is VR929. So this will move this way. As you can see, can't move it at all with my fingers. This one I can. It's not super noticeable, but it's certainly more than this. And these we're going to leave loose. And this will also be 50 Newton meters once the bar's in place. There we go. Top ones are 15s, and the bottom ones are 18s. So what I'm going to do, bring this up to it. Now, with that in place, we could torque these down. There we go. Those are 50 as well, and then the torque rod mounts are 85 here, and 85 here, and 85 here, so. Wow. Nice. Yeah, cool. That's all the engine mounts. The engine doesn't clunk anymore, and it's super nice to drive. And that's the end of the road for this project. I already have a replacement for it, which you may have heard in another video, so it's for sale. If you're interested in buying it, email me at frenchineer@gmail.com. That way all the communication is in one place and you know you're talking to me. So, this email. If you enjoyed this video, or the whole series, leave a like, and try to guess in the comments what this is being replaced by. Next week, we'll be getting back to my 200,000 mile, $2,000 Mercedes S-Class, and we'll be replacing all the air suspension. Thanks for watching, and a special thank you if you've been following this series from the beginning. I'll see you next week.